It's been some time since I brought you to see the bees, and I've had quite a few of you asking, how are the bees doing? Are you getting any honey off of them? What are you going to be doing about the bees since you're going to be giving up the allotments? Well, one of the plans is to move the colonies home. And last week, Josh and I took some time and he built a new stand for me and we got it dug in. It's down at the bottom of the garden, down where the compost bays are at the moment. And I want to move both colonies back home. Now, the reason for that is that, of course, I could leave them here, probably, could talk to the landowner, but it's just not really that feasible for my time. It takes quite a while to get to the allotment and the bees are right nearby. Just having them at home will be so much more convenient for extracting honey. I would have all of my equipment right there, just a short walk from where the bees are, and I can also keep an eye on them on a day-to-day basis. Now, a lot of beekeepers do keep their colonies out in kind of rural areas like this, sometimes in back gardens. In urban areas, you can keep them on roofs. You can keep them anywhere where there's good forage for them. And I think that at home there's going to be plenty. So I'm looking forward to having them home, that I can keep an eye on them, and also that convenience. I have 2 colonies and I've kept my colonies just down to 2 because that's as much as I can handle with my time. And they produce way more honey than we actually use. That's another thing that is on my mind. I want to move the bees before it starts getting cold, before it starts getting too wet, before it starts getting too windy, and get them settled in at home. And next year, they'll be able to expand the colony again, explore around their new area, our home, and keep producing honey. So I've just got my smoker on the go. I'm gonna go have a quick look at the bees. I'm gonna tell you what I'm doing in there, and then we'll head home and I'll talk to you a little bit as to what's going on in the lower part of the garden, where the bees are going to go, and other plans. Well, it looks pretty good. It looks really full. Let's take one of these frames out and have a little look at it. Oh yeah. Completely full of honey. Like every single cell is pretty much filled. There are a few here on the side that aren't. Let's look on the other side. Looks pretty good. That is a really well-formed frame of honey. I'm gonna get a good harvest this year. So I'll just put that back gently. And I'm gonna go through each of the other supers. And that's all I'm doing, is I'm going into the super, I'm having a look to see how much honey is in there, seeing if there are any issues. And then when I get down much lower, then I will put the clearing board on. I'm down to the brood box, and I went through the super just above it, frame by frame, and gently put all the bees back into the brood box with a shake, and sometimes a brush of my hand, or I've got a little brush as well. And so now what I'm going to do is put the clearing board on, and I'm just going to go like this, kind of gets them out of the way, so we don't get any squished bees. The hard work is done, and so now I've got to put the frames back into this super and then stack the other ones up on top. And all of the bees that are down in the brood box, or they haven't come back yet, they won't be able to get back up into these supers. And all the bees that are trapped inside the supers, they'll have to go through these bee escapes to get down. And the idea is that I can come back in a couple of days and there'll be no bees above. That rarely happens. There's usually a few, and occasionally a lot of the bees don't get the memo, but fingers crossed that it's an easy transition. I can take this honey off and we can get these bees home. Well, the bees are all sorted for the moment, and so the clearing board is on the brood box, which is the large box down at the bottom. And then over the next couple of days, the worker bees that are above will slowly migrate down to that brood box, get kind of trapped there so they can't get back up. They can still go out and come back in, and there's plenty of space for them down there. And then in a couple of days, Josh and I will go back out there and take all of those smaller boxes off the tops of the hives, those supers, and we'll transport them home. And at that time, I'll put a strap around the brood box so that the next day I can come out or go out to the bees and then safely put them in the car and bring them back. And this is where they're gonna go. Josh and I, a couple of weeks ago, spent some time using some extra wood that we had left over to build these rails for the colonies to live on, the hives to sit on. And there's space here for more than just the 2 colonies. And so I might expand them in the future, but in the very least, I have a lot more space to work with, to set my equipment, to work. I mean, look at this, so much more space than I have at the old sites. And this is also pointing due south, so the bees are going to get full sun, which they really appreciate. They use the sun to navigate, and it also warms up the hives in the morning. Now, you might be asking yourself, what about all of this back behind me? The compost bays, the pile of muck over there that you might have just spotted. Well, let me show you what we're going to do. Now, compost. You might recall that earlier on in the year, I had the first bay built a little bit further up in the garden, and then I changed my mind, brought them down here, and they've been doing okay down here, but it's just such a long trudge down, and it is a long trudge uphill to bring compost. And then another thing is that there is a sycamore tree right above, just like at the allotment. And those sycamore seeds, there's sycamore keys, they drift down and go straight into the stuff at the top. And this is what they look like over here. And they can go quite a long distance, and they love popping up, and they are very gregarious little trees that you have to pull out. So this is not really the ideal place to have a compost area. So we're in the middle of taking these compost bays out. All of this material is going to come out as well. And this is the new location of the compost area. It is half the distance. There aren't any trees that are going to shed seeds into the mix over here. And it's just going to be so much more convenient. Again, it's made out of pallets. There's 3 along the back and then 4 to create the bays. And what we've also done is line them with landscaping fabric. And this is the same biodegradable cornstarch material that I used when we put in our row of hedgerow plants at the back. Now that the new compost area is built, it's ready to go, it's time to start filling up at least one of those bays with garden waste and anything that hasn't broken down from this old compost pile over here in the pallets, and also some of this manure. We've just had 2 deliveries of partially composted manure brought in, and this is the same stuff that I've shown you before, same source, been using it at the allotment and here in the home garden. And I love using manure as a basis for making compost. And I have an entire video talking about that if you want to watch that after this. Before we have a little nosy in the veg patch, I just want to talk about this area between the compost area and the line of Minarette trees here. This area is going to be new garden space, and we're going to be using some of the manure directly on the ground with some cardboard to create a relatively large no-dig area. It'll be spaced a little bit further away from the trees and go right up to the edge of those compost areas with a little bit of space to work. And this area, this will be a nice broad area to be growing large quantities of crops like brassicas, or even growing things like calendula flowers. Do you remember over the winter when we planted a ton of bare root trees and shrubs? They've all done great, and these are the Minarette trees, so they grow as a column if you prune them that way. And look at all the new growth. I need to tie them in to this arch, so I'm going to be training these to grow as an arch on either side of this row. And I need to trim down these as well so that they are just very short spurs that come off of these trees. But I'm overjoyed with them, and I'm looking forward to putting in even more bare root plants over this coming winter. The shrubs that are along the side here, they've all fleshed out, or leafed out rather, and I think probably by next year we'll be getting some hedgerow fruits from this area as well. Rose hips and sloes and elder, and there's some hazelnuts in here too. Every time that I look at the veg patch, especially from down this angle, I'm just struck by how easy it was to convert all of this from grass into productive vegetable growing area. And this was all just grass at the beginning part of this year. And look at it. Look at all of this lush growth. Everything from corn and chard and beetroot to, in this bed, there's a mishmash of different perennial vegetables, including yacon. This is my first year growing it. Look at how big those leaves are. Apparently, I should expect it to flower soon. So big root vegetable. And then we've got perennial leeks coming up again, just down here. And I've let this sorrel grow. This was growing wild. And so this is an edible as well. I've just left it in there. And in here we've got skirrets. So much. I have more yacon growing in this bed. It really is crowding out everything underneath it, but we still have one of the round courgettes down there and celeriac growing there. That's this foliage. But you can also see here that I've got a couple of brassicas. I did pick the caterpillars off of them, but as you can see, I obviously didn't get all of them. But the purple sprouting broccoli that I have over here, and that I had the foresight to put netting over, it's doing much better. Much better. I mean, there's a couple of leaves that have some damage, but I think that was from before I netted them. And then also a lot of the seeds that I sowed before our holiday are up. And they're quite thick in places. And my idea here is that I'm going to go in, thin all of these, but take the thinnings and plant them into the Polycrub afterwards, because I'd like to have a bit more of a productive growing space in there over the winter. That's all spinach over there and radishes on the far side. I've got spring cabbage in here. And yes, slugs have been in here. Slugs have taken out a lot of the plants, but I think there's plenty here for me to work with, and I could probably squeeze in a last sowing of a lot of these leafy green vegetables. This triangular shaped bed on the far side, this was the last one that we put in over the summer, and we ran out of compost, which is why it's still partially covered in black plastic. But we have been filling it with what we have. That's the last of it. Obviously, we have a lot more compost with the manure, so we'll be topping up the bed soon, covering it, and this is going to be productive growing space next year. I'm also considering putting in a kind of a membrane along the side just to help stop the shrubs from on the other side growing and sending up shoots into this bed in the future. Now, earlier on in the year, I just shoved a few extra plants into this top side because there was enough compost and because I didn't have any place to put those plants. And look at what they've done. I put a pumpkin in there, Turk's turban, and I've got not one, but two pumpkins. and I wasn't really expecting much. So that is such a bonus. Couple of meals there. And then also the sage I put in, it was really suffering in the pot it was growing in, and look at how healthy it is now. Absolutely healthy, leafy, and this will stand right through the winters and we can come out and harvest when we need. I also planted some of my globe artichokes down into that new flower border, and I put the spares up here, and unfortunately the artichokes down in that bed have died. So I've got these 2 spares that I'll be able to move down there at some point. I'm so glad that I stuck them in here because I very nearly composted them. I've not grown corn in years. This is the first year in probably 7 or 8 years that I decided to give it another go. And I think today's the day to harvest. The reason that I haven't grown corn in years is that it really does need relatively calm weather, relatively sunny weather to grow and mature and be really productive. And this far north, and with our typical summer weather, corn just hasn't really done well for me, especially at the allotment, which is really exposed. But I thought I would give it another go, another try. And instead of growing sweet corn, so corn on the cob, I decided to do something a little bit different. And so I've grown this patch of popcorn fiesta. Now, it's not a true popping corn from what I understand. It's more of a flint corn that you can pop. And it comes in different colored kernels, and we have a lot of popcorn, so I thought this could be quite fun. Now, I've not done this before. I've never dried and used popcorn before. So if you have any tips for me, leave them as a comment down below. What I understand is that I need to cut the ears so that they have a little bit of extra stem so that I can use that stem to hang them up to dry. And I thought, let's cut one and have a look to see what it's looking like. Well, I'll just pull it off. Give it a little nip here. It's a good size ear. And I think we're in luck. Look at this. Gorgeous, isn't it? Look at this color. So let's pull it open and have a look to see what we have. It looks just like the photo on the seed packet. Really good kernel formation on this ear and all of those different colors. Now, they're really quite hard. So I think they have started to dry a little bit. But you wouldn't really eat this as corn on the cob. They're just not as palatable. But with luck, and if I completely dry these out, I can put them in our popcorn maker. Exciting! Most of the summer I've had this door wide open on the Polycrub, otherwise it gets way too hot. But it's been cooling down, so I've been nipping out in the evening and closing it up and then opening it first thing in the morning. And there is still a lot of lush growth in here. Now the tomatoes on the left hand side, because of the butternut squash growing at the base, I've not been able to get in there and prune as well as the tomatoes on the right. And so there's a lot of extra green foliage, but there are still tons of tomatoes in there, and I can see a lot that I need to come in and pick. And you'll also notice that a lot of them are starting to ripen more higher up, and that's because we've been picking all of the ones that are a bit lower. And there are tons of green tomatoes too. Some of them will ripen, some won't, which is why I shared my green tomato chutney recipe with you not too long ago. And so if you have an overabundance of green tomatoes and you don't know what to do with them, head over to that video. I also have the recipe on my website, so you can print out the recipe, and it's green tomato chutney. And I have another recipe, green tomato relish, which is delicious as well. August and September are really the main months for tomatoes in my region. which is weird for some people because they haven't seen a fresh tomato coming out of their garden in months. And so it just shows how different climates can be. Even so, even though it's September and there are still lots of green tomatoes and even some cucumbers up there, very soon I'm going to be clearing all of the plants out of here for the most part, composting them and preparing these beds to grow leafy greens over the winter. And that way I'll still be able to get my gardening fix. I'll overwinter some plants in here, and hopefully we have a continuous supply of fresh vegetables coming out of the garden thanks to this really warm and insulated undercover growing space. I've not seen any wasps in here in, well, since July when we had really hot weather. And I think that it just got too hot for them in here and they either died or moved out. I'm not really sure, but I'm pleased that they left before they started getting a little bit too aggressive, and they tend to do that in August. And you can see that there's a spider web right here and it goes straight into the wasp nest here, so there's definitely no wasps there. And I accidentally knocked it with a bamboo cane not too long ago. I think that I want to do something to try to repair that because I want to keep this wasp nest here in the Polycrub so that hopefully it deters any other wasps from wanting to set up camp in here next year or the years to come. I'm just going to prop these up here so that we can enjoy their beautiful colors for just a little bit longer before I hang them up to dry. And again, this is my first year in growing popcorn or flint corn. And if you have any tips for me about drying, about cleaning, about storing them, please let me know as a comment down below. Now, it's been very busy here and there are quite a few things in the garden right now that show just how busy we're going to be in the coming weeks. So bringing home the bees, that is exciting, and it's going to be fabulous having them at the bottom of the garden. So much more convenient for honey extraction, plus I'll be able to see them every day, which is what I've not been able to do in their current place. Then there's some manure, stacking it, so in the compost base, some of it, but also spreading it on new garden beds. And although it is autumn and we're heading into colder days, nothing is slowing down in the garden. We still have yet to start the pond. There's the new beds. There's, of course, the Polycrub, which I'll continue growing in over the winter. And I need to harvest as much as I can out of this before it starts getting too cold, though, because I want to be able to prepare those beds and get other crops started for overwintering. And you can bet your money that I'm going to have loads of green tomatoes. And so making more green tomato relish and green tomato chutney is on the agenda. And if you would like to use my recipe, I'll put something up on the screen so you can go watch that video now. And remember, there's a printable recipe card for that, so you can print it out and make it at home without having to refer back to the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now.